You are listening to KSG Podcast. This is a short, crisp, concise, exam oriented, edited editorial for civil services aspirants. In this podcast, we are going to talk about RCEP now in force. Source is P.R. Krishna Kutti's article for the print. The world's largest trade agreement, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, that is RCEP, which includes China and 14 other Asia Pacific nations and covers a third of global GDP, came into effect on the 1st of January, but without one Asian economic giant, India. The government had walked out of the pact in November 2019. On 1st of January 2022, the RCEP came into force with an eye on providing a tremendous boost to the post-COVID-19 economic recovery efforts for the member countries involved. The trading bloc includes 10 ASEAN countries: Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, and their five major trading partners: Australia, China, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea. However, countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines are yet to ratify the agreement, and ratification by Myanmar, which has been ruled by a military junta since February 2021, is pending acceptance from other members. India pulled out of the pact in November 2019 after talks failed to address its concerns over issues like rules of origin, opening up of services, etc. There were also fears of the flooding of Chinese imports in Indian markets. Given certain developments such as the pandemic, new geostrategic partnerships like the Quad, and India's active pursuit of new FTAs, that is, free trade agreements, with six other countries, the experts understand what India could have gained or not from the RCEP. According to experts, India should focus more on BIMSTEC, that is Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation countries, BIMSTEC countries, and Africa, while working towards strengthening the trade ecosystem. Talking about engagement with African trading blocs and BIMSTEC, according to Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General at Delhi-based think tank Research and Information System for Developing Countries, India made a necessary decision to pull out of the RCEP in 2019, but that now it must also look to engage with and revive other trading blocs. India made a timely decision to pull out of the RCEP, and there's a certain comfort with that, given it has FTAs with 13 out of the 15 members. But having made that decision, India must now actively engage with other trading blocs like AFCFTA, that is African Continental Free Trade Area, and SACU, that is Southern African Customs Union, adding that India should also revive the BIMSTEC. BIMSTEC is an inter-regional grouping among India, Thailand, Myanmar, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan. Now let's talk about India curbing one-sided trade relationships. India stood to face one-sided trade relationships with countries like China and New Zealand if it was part of the RCEP. China hasn't upheld certain WTO obligations in terms of market economy access for India. It still has not opened up to pharmaceutical or IT products from India. So if China wasn't reciprocal in the bilateral relationship, why would they be reciprocal to us in RCEP? It would have been one-sided. With New Zealand, there is a fear on the Indian side of the dumping of dairy products. India's National Dairy Development Board, that is NDDB, goes into villages to reach dairy farmers, but in New Zealand, the industry is highly mechanized and they often have surplus. If we had swung open our doors to them by being in RCEP, at least a few 100 million dairy farmers in India would be unemployed. Asked why India is then pursuing a CEPA, that is Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, that is CEPA, with Australia, where there are similar concerns, well, that's a much larger deal and it's easier to deal with such sensitivities on a bilateral level. Moving on to strengthening India's trade ecosystem. Experts have argued that India needs to strengthen its trade ecosystem and develop domestic capabilities in critical areas like electronic products. According to Chaturvedi, as India negotiates more FTAs, it needs to strengthen its own trade ecosystem through credit creation, infrastructure support, institutional preparedness, production quality assessment, etc. We are making progress. For example, our dependence on Singapore and Colombo ports has declined. India's 41 ports are seeing more and more investments come in. But supply chain resilience definitely needs work. Sunita Raju, professor of economics at Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, who in 2019 co-authored a study suggesting India's concerns about Chinese imports were exaggerated, said India needs to focus on upgrading domestic capabilities in the sphere of technology. Electronics is a major sector for all countries. Let's look at imports of solar batteries in India, for example. The reason imports of Chinese solar batteries is so high is because Indian manufacturers are not able to match prices. Domestic technological capabilities are not as strong and firms do not spend enough on R&D. If it's not China, it will be some other technologically advanced country flooding our markets. We need to focus on upgrading the domestic capability and be competent on our own. India's trade deficit with China stood at $44.1 billion in 2020 to 2021, according to Commerce Ministry data. It stood at $53.57 billion in 2018 to 2019. Lastly, we talk about reducing Chinese imports. According to Chaturvedi, by not joining the China focused trade bloc, New Delhi has worked on reducing imports from Beijing. For example, in pharma, India has worked to reduce the types of major active pharmaceutical ingredients, that is API, it imports from China from 48 to 24. According to Indian Commerce Ministry data, imports from China have steadily reduced in the last 3 years, from $76.3 billion in 2017 to 2018 and $70.3 billion in 2018 to 2019 to $65.2 billion in 2019 to 2020 and $65.2 in 2020 to 2021. Exports to China, meanwhile, hover around $20 billion. So that's it for this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. To join KSG India courses and to crack the IELTS exam, visit ksgindia.com. You can also get a PDF of this podcast on ksgindia.com. Thanks for watching and do subscribe to our channel.